What did that one teacher at your school get fired for? Well, he didn't get fired for sleeping with a cheerleader, not sure the administration knew. He didn't get fired for attending the football players' parties and supplying them with substances, again, not sure the administration knew. He didn't get fired when he was busted for public behind a local bar. But he did get fired when they found all of our final exams, final papers, and other assignments ungraded in his desk drawer when they moved his classroom over the summer. Turns out that he never graded anything and simply gave kids the grades he thought they should have. And you know what? He deserved to get fired for that too, for being such a friggin' idiot. At least dispose of the evidence. Story 2. High school algebra teacher Mr. Robertson. He knew his crap, he made algebra fun. And he was unconventional. The first day of class, he threw the textbook on his desk and it slid off and hit the floor. "This is your textbook," he said. "I'm required to give it to you. Take it home, keep it safe, bring it back undamaged. We will use it for homework. Don't bring it to class." He was the cool teacher who rode a secondhand motorcycle as his primary, only vehicle. He stored his riding leathers in the classroom locker. He also put his briefcase in there, and it sat there the whole year unopened as far as I could tell. He taught us from handouts, and from what he wrote on the board, he showed us tricks to solve equations. He ran the math club and made it fun. He told us all that he was adding an extra test to our course and it would be worth half of our grade and allow us to study for it in class while he walked around giving people extra help. The test was fake. He handed out questions from Mad Magazine. He just made us study more. We're not even mad. The one problem he had was with our school dress code for teachers. He wanted to teach in slacks, nice shoes, and a nice shirt. The school wanted him in a suit and tie. He was allowed to take off the suit jacket if he wore a vest underneath. This was South Texas, and it got hot in the classrooms at times. He argued, they demanded. He pointed out that the history teacher got to teach wearing a jersey and shorts. The school countered that the history teacher was also the coach, and that was his uniform. Mr. Robertson volunteered to be an assistant coach. The school said it didn't work that way. So he showed up wearing a suit. At the end of the month, teachers were complaining that he stunk. He countered that he wasn't going to pay for all that dry cleaning. The school cracked down, so he showed up in a perfect three-piece suit made out of denim. Blue jeans, blue with stitching that looked like Levi. Even the tie was denim, and that lasted a week before the crackdown. Then he showed up in a corduroy suit. Our class asked him if these suits were not expensive. He said that Houston had lots of great secondhand stores. The corduroy suit lasted about 3 days. He was a chaperone at prom. He arrived in a three-piece suit and tie, which was completely pink. This was in 1981, so he cut quite a figure. He told us that the principal yelled at him for that. He made a habit of coming in his suit on Monday and leaving his jacket and vest in the locker. He taught in suit pants and shirt with tie. Sometimes the principal caught him and he'd pulled the jacket out of the closet for a few days. He wasn't asked back at the end of his contract. Last I heard, he went to work for a chemical engineering company and their R&D team for several times more than our principal made a year. And that's when I found out that while teaching us, he was a doctoral candidate working on his math dissertation. He really loved math and wanted to share it with everyone. The following year, my algebra teacher was a woman who wore floor-length dresses and wrote equations on transparencies while talking directly to the overhead projector. If we didn't do it by the book, it was a problem. Yes, we keep having to break the bad habits that Mr. Robertson gave his students, like getting the correct answer faster. Story 3. My home economics teacher had dementia or something of the sort and would straight up leave school in the middle of the day and wouldn't tell anyone where she was going. She did this like every week or multiple times per week. We would be in the middle of class and she'd disappear and someone would have to go and tell the office that she left. She also took a few of us on a trip to the grocery store, and on the way there she goes, "Yeah, I ran a child over one time," and just laughs like, okay. Yeah, anyways, they fired her after she almost burned the school down because she left the stove going with food on it. Story 4. I had 2 teachers in high school, one male, one female, who were both in their late 30s, both married, and both pretty attractive people. Their classrooms were right next to each other, and they would openly flirt in the hall between classes. It was a running joke among the students that they were having an affair, but I don't think anyone truly believed it. It was just low-hanging fruit for teenagers, until one night I got a call around 3 a.m. from one of my friends who lived in this neighborhood in town that was near some railroad tracks, the same neighborhood where both of the teachers lived. Apparently, there had been a bad accident at the railroad crossing and someone in an SUV got hit by a train, and the word was getting around that it was the 2 teachers. By the time school started that morning, the rumors were confirmed when both teachers didn't show up because they were both in the hospital, and we had subs in both classes. They had apparently sneaked out of their homes and were carrying on their actual affair somewhere out of town. Then, on the way back to their neighborhood, tried beating a train across the tracks and got smoked by it. They got caught having an affair in a very public way by getting hit by a train. The male teacher amazingly walked away from it with minor injuries. The female teacher, on the other hand, spent weeks in the hospital and almost passed away. I think she had to relearn how to walk and talk. She sued both the railroad company as well as the male teacher and won, I believe. I don't even remember if they got fired, but they definitely weren't at the school for the rest of the year, or ever again after that. I just so happened to have them both as teachers at the time, so we had substitutes filling in the rest of the year. Those two classrooms were insanely awkward that day. Story 5. Rye Windsor was our German and geography teacher at Northeast Intermediate in Midland, Michigan. He was German himself and a war orphan, World War II. He was an amazing teacher, and he even had his own learning system for German. Also, he didn't just teach us German or geography. There would be days where we'd come in on his chalkboard, which he invented. It was divided into 8 or 12 rows of chalkboard, which could be rotated so that you had, in essence, 4 chalkboards. It was great for group tests and learning in general. It was stuff related to philosophy, criticism, critical thinking versus obedience, and so on. Remember, this guy had seen firsthand the fatal outcomes of his parents to bombs, the aftermath of war, and then he emigrated to the U.S. and joined the Army and rose to the rank of colonel after 3 decades of service, first active duty, and then the reserves. Retiring at 56, the dude even had a meritorious service medal of honor for his contributions to the Army Reserve. They say he quote-unquote retired from teaching in 1986, but people in the know learned that he was basically forced out, threatened with firing. They didn't like that he wasn't teaching quote-unquote by the book. It's possible some parents didn't like that he was handing out pamphlets on important and critical philosophical subjects when he was supposed to be teaching us German and geography. This was the Reagan era, mind you, while his pamphlets covered things like the sacrifices the early founders of the USA made, like losing farms and businesses to confiscation or burning, losing loved ones, etc., and thus at first glance sounded very patriotic. All of his lessons ultimately were about questioning authority and using critical thinking skills to demand answers to nonsense, and parents tend to just assume that this is subversive, and heck yeah, it was, in a good way. The truth is, if you ask most students who had him for German and or geography like me, they will tell you he was probably one of the best teachers, if not the best teacher they ever had. We're talking Dead Poet Society level teacher. We're talking Socrates. And we know what they did to both those guys. R.I.P. Raymond Windsor, they did you wrong. Story 6. I felt bad for my one. He was genuinely the sweetest guy and we all loved him. He was never inappropriate, but he could build rapport with us like no one else. My mate found out that his house had been robbed. This teacher knew we smoked cigarettes and knew he needed to calm down. He said to me, "Take him for a cig and come back in 5. Another teacher overheard him and he got suspended at first and eventually fired. Should he have been letting us smoke? No. Was this a genuine human being who could see a 16-year-old in distress and knew he needed to go and do something he was going to do anyway to calm down? Yes. I stand by Mr. Phillips. Story 7. I had a German teacher that nobody liked. He was a hard person with no chill. For example, he would make us take practice quizzes for homework and grade them for accuracy. However, I realized that if you just did what he said on the assignments, you were probably going to walk away with a B. If you cheated to get a better grade on the practice quizzes, then you didn't learn the stuff and you wouldn't get a good grade. He was a hard person, but he wasn't that bad. He was forced to resign when he jokingly threw a piece of chalk at a student and she complained to the administration. The problem with being the teacher nobody likes is that you can't joke around with anyone. I received this info from the teacher himself. As an aside, this teacher took a trip to Italy every year and offered the trip to any school staff or any of his students. I went when I was in 11th grade. It was an amazing trip. It was him, me, a senior, and 3 other teachers. We were up by 6 a.m. and sightseeing until midnight. We only ate at good, non-touristy restaurants. It was my teacher's 40-something time going, and he was fluent in Italian. We spent 2 weeks traveling all over the country on a bus. Definitely a trip of a lifetime. It wasn't school-sponsored, so we all drank at dinner. Usually the teacher would have 2 wine spritzers and almost pass out. The other student and I would make sure he got to his hotel room, and then we'd go out into the city all night. Story 8. I had a history teacher who told all the students in the senior class that Obama was going to tax 5 cents for every text message. Some of us, including myself, were old enough to vote. I called him out on it, asking for the source, and he told me the Washington Post. So that night, I scoured the 2008 internet to find any report on it whatsoever, and of course, it did not exist. The next day, I came back to class and told him I looked into the Washington Post and didn't find anything. He then tried to explain that I misunderstood him, and he said the New York Post. Figuring he would do this, I told him I already checked there and every other major news source as well, and politely suggested that he may have been using his position to manipulate students into voting a certain way, and he kicked me out of class. Almost immediately afterward, he was fired, and everyone thought it had something to do with me reporting him or something, which I didn't do. It turns out he had been stealing school computer equipment to use in his weird sect of a Baptist church. He was prime MAGA before MAGA existed. Story 9. When I was at the playground with my child, a kindergarten group came in, 2 teachers, both on their phones. One child fell off the swing and started crying. One teacher barely looked up and said, "Oh, you'll be fine." Then another girl came to the teacher and said she really had to go to the bathroom. The teacher replied, "You can hold it." The girl started crying, saying she couldn't. The teacher insisted, "You have to." The girl kept crying and ended up peeing and pooping her pants. I took my kids' spare clothes, they were way too small but better than nothing, and some wet wipes and helped her change. Then I asked which kindergarten they were from. It was a public playground in a park. And I called the headmaster to file a complaint. I hope those teachers were fired. I'm not a wild helicopter parent. Kids should learn and they should fall sometimes, but human dignity matters at any stage. Story 10. My grandpa taught shop. A local punk kid, an 18-year-old senior, kept escalating insults for months and went a step too far and insulted my grandma to my grandpa's face. Unfortunately for and unbeknownst to said punk kid, Grandpa was at one time the Pacific Fleet boxing champ during World War II. The punk kid lost all his front teeth and had his jaw wired for a bit. Grandpa got fired, even in the 50s, but regretted nothing. He is also legendary for having broken his hand punching a bull between the eyes and knocking it out. His brothers all swore it was true when I was a kid. They may have been messing with us though, as they were all quite fond of tall tales. I believe the one about the punk kid though. Grandma showed us the newspaper clipping about it. LOL. Apparently, the kid was not only prosecuted for public obscenity because he was considered to be adequately punished for the crime by my grandpa. So whatever he said was pretty foul for the time. Grandpa was fired but not prosecuted and charges weren't pressed. Story 11. Never got fired but was found in his 70s, abandoned, alone in a dementia, terrible nursing home. Mr. McDonald was a teacher in a New York public school who always had a select group called Mac Boys that added new boys as the older boys graduated. They all came from homes with an absent dad, divorced, dad passed away, foster care. Back then, everyone thought he was a wonderful man. He took the boys on summer vacations and weekend trips to the beach, amusement parks, camping, museums, and so on. Years later, as adults, some of the boys reconnected and talked about what happened to them. No one pressed charges, but two of them wanted to know where he was and if he was around kids. They found him across the country in Arizona in a nursing home. They told the nurses he was a harmful individual. Story 12. We had a popular film class in middle school. It was super competitive to get into. I fit the criteria and had film experience but didn't get in. They went on out-of-state trips and filmed all sorts of awesome things. I was disappointed at the time. I noticed that only certain types of students were in the class. A year later, he's fired and arrested. It turns out, in addition to the stuff shown to the school, he was filming extracurriculars with the students, both boys and girls. I was very glad I wasn't in that class after that. Story 13. Long time ago, 1976-ish, our physics teacher, Mr. Jones, was known to have a short fuse but was a great teacher until he asked the class if we thought we'd pass our O levels, so we were like 15-ish. My mate, who was actually a science brain box, was the only one who put his hand up. For reasons no one understood, the teacher thought he was being a smart aleck, walked over and pulled him by the hair to the front of the class and started to pound his head against the wall. He suddenly stopped and said sorry and walked out. The plasterboard wall had broken with the force. My mate was shaking like a leaf. 1 hour later, parents turned up at the headmaster's door and Mr. Jones was never seen again. Genuinely frightening at the time. My mate got over it and became a minor celebrity at school, if that's the right word. Story 14. In the 50s, in my elementary school class, we had a teacher who was so violent that none of us would even ask to go to the bathroom because depending on her mood, she might slap us across the face. So we had this boy who was slow and had a hard time learning to read and write. Because I had polio, I stayed in the classroom during recess and our lunch recess. So she had him stay in with me and I worked with him. One day, she looked at his writing and she just started slapping him over and over. One of the other kids started crying and that terrible person just kept on slapping little Joey. Finally, one of the kids ran out and got another teacher to help and she came in and almost tackled the teacher. Then the principal came and even then the teacher kept trying to hit Joey. They sent the teacher home and the rest of the day the principal was our teacher. The next day we got a new teacher and Joey sent to a different school. Story 15. One of our principals was an alcoholic. An English teacher saw him after classes leaving his office with wet pants and wobbling down the stairs, leaning on the wall. Then he was fired and later was hired as a government official, suburb administration or something like that. One history teacher was skinny, yelling, and heck of an angry person. She was threatening misbehaving kids with her ex-convict brother. We wrote a petition to remove her and she was removed from teaching in our class and later she was fired. Another principal was told to leave on her own or the State Security Service, Kazakhstan, will take her from the celebration of the 1st of September in handcuffs in front of all the school. She was investigated for embezzlement. Gee, these were crazy 2000s. Story 16. 2 teachers were fired during my high school years. One was a history teacher, and he was a really good teacher. He had been a college wrestler and competed in an Olympics. Years later, while teaching us, a student, male football lineman, kept messing with him, slamming his shoulder into him really hard when walking by him, insulting him in class, and things like that. One day as the class was letting out, the student two-handed shoved him back into a wall. The teacher went in for a wrestling takedown and put the kid through a desk, very seriously harmed. I never saw the teacher again, but I know they didn't file any charges against him. The student didn't return either. Some rumors said he couldn't use the stairs due to his injuries, old buildings with no elevators or ramps at the time, while others said he transferred out of the district. The second was an English teacher. She was a really good teacher as well, but she was caught in an inappropriate relationship with a female student, i.e. statutory offense at a minimum. The odd one that never got fired was an old male English teacher who'd spend his time after school in the boys' locker room watching the kids shower after sports practices. He always had an excuse for being there, but most of the students just gave up and went home in their sweaty/dirty gear. Story 17. Former principal. I've fired 5 teachers and moved on, several more. 4 were simply terrible teachers who had no control, made no improvement after intensive support, and eventually enough was enough. 1 was fired because she was a narcissistic bully with a victim complex. The rest were moved on because they were either not good enough or were having a negative effect on team morale or were not nice people or didn't like children. Other non-teaching staff have been fired for alcoholism, theft, attendance issues, online behavior, and general foolishness. I was principal for over 20 years. Story 18. Okay, I got 2 stories. My second grade teacher threw my desk across the room because I couldn't find my homework fast enough. The smart aleck kid in the front row couldn't find his and she started counting down from 10. With every number, she turned a deeper shade of red. At 2, he found it and read out the answer. She scanned the room and saw me. I must have been panicked because somehow she knew I couldn't find mine either. I barely squeaked out, "I can't find mine either," and she raged down the aisle, roared that I should get out of the way, picked up my desk, shook everything onto the floor, and threw it on the ground. She found my math homework, made me sit in my chair in the middle of the mess and read out the answer. My mom had passed away like 10 months earlier. I was almost nonverbal and a straight-A student. I just started at the school a month prior in the middle of the school year. I never told anyone, but my uncle found out because my cousin was in class with me. Not only did she get fired, she got kicked out of her religious order. She was a nun. The second story is just like a lot of others here, a gym teacher caught with a high school student in his office. They moved in together after she graduated. And if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 19. Kids kept pulling the fire alarm during finals week as a prank. The alarm goes off again during my biology final. The terrible biology teacher threw a power-tripping hissy fit and told us to stay in our seats and keep working. The biology classroom is in the basement with limited exits. About 15 minutes go by and then the dean arrives. She has a nickname that involves a play on monster for a reason. The dean asks him to please step out into the hallway. As soon as the door shuts, she spends the next 5 fully uninterrupted minutes utterly tearing this man a new one, loud enough for us to be able to hear. There are no repeats of insults, there are no repeats of his offenses or the codes he just violated or her explanations of how problematic the stuff was or any of her thoughts. Just a straight 5 minutes of total and complete verbal evisceration. Absolute carnage. It was one of the most magnificent dressing downs I have ever heard in my life, both real and from Hollywood. He was not present the next year. Screw that guy. It should be noted I hate that man to this day. When I went to him halfway through the school year to ask if I could move closer to the front because I was having trouble concentrating in the back row, he said, "That's not my problem." I got a D for the year. He ended. My love for science and my entire extended family still comment occasionally about how surprised they were that I did not go into zoology or something like it. Story 20. As a longtime higher education teacher, I have had 3 coworkers fired for various malfeasance, all adults, so no child harmful behavior stuff, just harmful behavior. One had a group of students/girlfriends more than I could count. He was having students grade his papers and enter the grades, etc. One of the ladies got mad at him and went to the dean to explain what was going on. He was gone the next day. Last I heard, he had opened a roto-rooter type business. One was turning in performance documents for worksite learning, on-the-job training for students, and never visited the student's place of work. He was gone the next day. I ran into him working at a bike shop, awkward, a few years later. The last was a math teacher who was having a thing with a much younger female student with a 20-year age difference. Evidently, she had a seizure of some kind in the parking lot. When the paramedics showed up, they asked her who they should contact, and she said, "Mr. Math Teacher." They went and got him out of class and took him to the parking lot. He blew his top and was yelling at her that she shouldn't have done that, blah, blah, blah. All of the school witnessed the cruelty and I never saw him again. I hear he moved across the country and was working for a fancy pants school. Story 21. I went to an American international school in South America when I was a kid. My dad's work took us down there when I was young. There was a substitute teacher that we had every so often, Mr. Chapman. Because of being part of a smallish community of expats, there wasn't a huge pool of substitutes for the school to choose from, so he was around pretty often. Maybe every few weeks we'd see him around campus, always nice. No one noticed anything strange or off about him. This was maybe 7th grade or thereabouts. There was an English language newspaper in the city we lived in, and one day there's an article with a photograph of a man in handcuffs, Mr. Chapman in handcuffs. He was arrested by Interpol and extradited back to, I want to say Canada? He was a fugitive who had fled child harmful behavior charges. I imagine that counts as getting fired. Story 22. I know you said one, but I have two from the same year. The first was my math teacher, who was also the girls' volleyball coach. He got involved with one of the players, and he both got fired and went to prison with a statutory offense charge. The second was the football coach who, along with some of the players, orchestrated a plan to tie down another school's mascot, a live bulldog, and allowed two pit bulls to maul it, along with doing other terrible things to it. The coach and the players involved were charged with animal cruelty and sent to prison, but fortunately the bulldog survived and recovered. Story 23. This was at an expensive private college preparatory school. Most of these happened after I graduated, but while my sister was still a student. These are all different teachers, obviously. Got mad that an exchange student wanted to celebrate Chinese New Year's with her host family and had gotten permission from the school administration to take the day off, and so sent her an email asking why she just didn't move back to China. Criticized the headmaster for being a Republican. Convinced the Spanish teacher to go on a date with him, then kept pestering her to the point where she had to file a restraining order, which meant that he literally couldn't go in the school building while she was there. Began a relationship, i.e. statutory offense, with a student. Showed up intoxicated to a basketball game and pushed the student. I believe that some of the high school students had to take the teacher's keys away because he wanted to drive home. Embezzled the profits from the school basketball game, candy/soda sales, basically stole the cash from the register. Graded the students too harshly, by which I mean that the rich boys wanted her to give them A's even if they got all the answers wrong because they didn't pay attention in class or read the material. Story 24. The vice principal got fired after dealing with this particular student, about 16, for the millionth time. What got him fired, though, was the moment he absolutely lost his temper and slammed the student into a wall in his office, which was fully visible from the hallway due to its large windows, then put his hands around his neck and literally choked him. Thankfully, another student intervened by trying to pull the vice principal off the kid. VP was over 6 feet. Both students were 5 foot 10 inches tall. Another ran to the office screaming, "Mr. redacted name is choking student redacted name." Boy, didn't the principal come bolting out of the office. She had high heels on and kicked him off. She ran up to the VP and kicked him from behind right in his knees, causing the VP to fall. Another student, probably staff too, was already on the phone with 911. The VP refused to leave. We all watched him leave in handcuffs. The student was taken to the hospital by another teacher. He had visible markings around his neck from the terrible VP. No idea what happened after that, as it was my last day at that school. Family was moving across the country. The principal is still at that school to this day, saw it in a news article from that town, but is planning to retire at the end of this school year. It's about time, Mrs. B. You've been there the last 27 years. It's your time now. Story 25. Oof, I got a few. My 6th grade karate teacher got arrested when I was in 12th grade. When it came out, he had harmed several girls at the time I was also there. I have very distinct memories of this sole male teacher letting the girls change in his class when the locker room was full, only come out when one of the victims tried to cause her own passing by walking into traffic, and her parents caught her first after finding the note exposing everything that happened to her, and another 3 girls also came forward after the case was opened. My 9th grade drama teacher was fired in the first week of school after it came to a head that he had, 1, been involved with some 11th and 12th grade girls on the class trip the prior year, can't remember details past that, and 2, put his son's head through a wall. One of those chocolate bar fundraisers had already started, and with all the drama surrounding the situation, administration completely forgot about the fundraiser, and we all maybe helped ourselves to free chocolate for the next couple of weeks until it was gone. We didn't have a replacement teacher for about 6 months. Story 26. Okay, it wasn't at my school, but I was directly involved. I was a bouncer, maybe 20 years old, and in 21, there's this dude in his late 40s, early 50s, grabbing these young women who have had to have been 18, 19 in the club I worked at. I asked him to let them go and then ended up shoving him out the door as he protests. He calms down when we're outside and tells me they're dealing substances or something. My guy, this is XYZ nightclub. We're fine with that. Don't be pawing at the girls. I check up the alleyway that is the entrance to the place and he goes for it. He throws a fist at my jaw and the other at my temple. They're pretty pathetic attempts and I shrug off the worst of it and take him down. He hits the ground, immediately wrapped up with his arms behind his back, and upon the first intake of breath, he goes, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that." We cart him up to the road and the cops from the police station, 200-meter distance, arrest him. The next day, one tells me he's a teacher from a local high school. I talked to some girls working as bartenders a few months back, end up chatting to them about the story, tell them the year, the school. Oh, that's what happened to him. These kids were in his class and he disappeared halfway through the year. There were rumors, but they've never been substantiated up until I threw in my 2 cents. Story 27. Grabbed a student who was being a smart aleck by the throat and threw him against the lockers in front of his mom. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, though. Some other things that happened before she got fired. She would start today by smelling each student and lining up the smelly ones to berate them in front of everyone for not cleaning themselves or their clothes. She caught a student picking her nose. The student swore she was just adjusting her nose ring, and she made her stand in front of the class and dig for gold, show off your bounty. She threw erasers at students not paying attention. She gave us all a lecture on how our terrible behavior was having her lupus worse and that if she dropped passed away in class, it would be our fault. We were learning about the reserve pass system, and she made all the indigenous kids stand with their noses touching the wall so they couldn't see the board, and said they could only learn what their classmates wrote down for them, but if you got caught, you had to join them. The class collectively walked out during that one. She didn't like the smell of one student's lunch and made him eat outside every single day, including in the middle of Canadian winters, and in retrospect, she was just being racist. He was Indian. Story 28. In kindergarten, my school principal either came out or was discovered to be gay, and that she lived together with her partner. They fired her for that. She was only there in my kindergarten year, but despite me being a rebellious, loud, wild child being mistreated at home, I remember her being kind and pathetic and even laughing at some of my jokes. She made me want to be good and impress her. She made an impact on me enough to remember her despite it being only one school year and me being so young then. That was around 30 years ago. Because she was gay, the school fired her and replaced her with a mean, hateful person that didn't care about kids and shouldn't have had the job. One of those power-tripping types, so I pretty much became the troubled delinquent there on out. I didn't understand why they fired her back then, but I was still upset about it, even more now. Story 29. My time to shine. It was me. It was my first year of high school, grade 8, first week actually, and my first home economics class. The teacher had been there for long enough that she had taught some of my mom's colleagues, I'm guessing 25 plus years. Class starts, we all take our seats at our individual stations. I think each student has cabinets in or under their desk, and there was a long row of cabinets and basins running the length of the wall opposite to where the teacher would usually stand at the front of the class. Being new to the class and already enjoying cooking, I was enthusiastic. We are instructed to check in our cabinets and make sure that the list that is taped on the inside of the small cupboard are the items actually in the cupboard. I go through the list and find a big metal mixing bowl that shouldn't be there. So instead of walking around the class, mixing bowl in hand, and checking all the cabinets' lists for where they actually should be, I wait for the teacher to get me so I can ask. At this point, she is making the rounds to each student to check their list and items. I notice that she is loudly berating each student and whacking them over the head with the items that are incorrect. I'm shocked to see she bonked a friend of mine on the opposite side of the class. I'm getting increasingly agitated, waiting my turn as she makes her way around the class, and note that my friend had just started to cry at this point. She was wearing an Alice band and the bonk was not gentle. Eventually, the teacher gets to me, and before I could speak, she predictably lifts the metal mixing bowl to smack me with it. I jumped out of my seat like I was burned before she could strike me. She was a very, very short woman, so even teenage me was taller than her, and she couldn't reach me with the bowl. She screamed at the top of her shrill voice that I must take my seat or she would take me to the principal's office. In a moment of clarity, I told her that's fine, I can find the way myself, and I walked myself out of the class, taking my crying friend by the hand on my way out. I went straight to the principal's office and we both made a statement. I'm not sure if she was fired or asked to take her retirement early, but I never saw her again. I'm aware that this sounds like a "and then everyone clapped" story, but it totally happened and I have never had issues standing up to authority. This time it panned out, the lady had obviously cracked after too many years teaching. Wrong student. Story 30. I went to a strict Catholic school. While I was standing in the corridor as punishment, a brother/monk dragged another boy out from another class and deliberately broke his arm in front of me. The brother was never seen again. I was told to shut up about it, but I told everyone 45 years ago. The brother didn't see me when he broke the arm, only after, and what he did, it was totally deliberate. I can still hear the snap, scream, and anger. Story 31. Mine got fired for doing his job. A high school English teacher at a small North Texas town, early 90s. Eccentric, like a good English teacher should be, but not overly so. If someone told him, hang on, he'd go to a cabinet and fake dangle hanging from the edge. But he made the students earn their grades instead of letting the football stars skate by. Rural Texas lives for high school football. So he got reported and fired for being gay, which he denied. He was never inappropriate and never talked about his personal life. Even just getting his actual name was kind of a thing. It's been 30-something years, but I remember you, Mr. B. Story 32. Had a teacher that hated me. Long story, but the short of it is her teaching style didn't mesh well with my learning style, and she took that personally. One day, she had flowers in class, and the girl behind me had allergies. She kept sneezing, and I asked if we could move them outside. The teacher said no. I got annoyed, picked them up, gently sat them outside because I was tired of the sneezing at my back. I got sent to the office. It was the only time I really got in trouble in class, and the vice principal happened to be the coach of the hockey team that I played on. He thought the whole thing was weird, so he started to look into the classroom situation more. Well, the teacher didn't stop there. She started pestering people I was friends with, being nasty to them for associating with me, including my then GF, who was on track to be valedictorian. This girl did not mess around when it came to grades, so when the teacher started to give her bad marks for no reason, she got angry. The teacher was a first-year teacher, and my ex's parents raised heck about it as well. It was a really bad look to be going after otherwise good students. I don't know if fired is what happened, but she was not asked to return for the next school year. Story 33. The whole school got shut down for altering students' grades, harming kids, and having stolen property from other schools in the district. All the computers, textbooks, everything was all stolen. I remember feeling super uncomfortable when I attended the school, like something was really off. Once we were indoors for gym because it was raining and everyone was on computers, and I was just reading my book when I accidentally made contact with my gym teacher. He was a typical crusty orange Florida man in his 50s, so he was very creepy to begin with. I will never forget that he literally pulled out a huge tub of Vaseline and then stuck 2 fingers in to get a big blob on his hand, then rubbed it on over his mouth. I can understand using a little bit of Vaseline as lip balm, but this man must have had an inch thick of Vaseline on his fingertip and maintained eye contact while he smeared it on his mouth. Story 34. My 11th grade German language teacher. First of all, he was a creeper. He didn't own a car and only used a bicycle to get around. I would see him riding all over town. He would come to where I worked and always be looking for something in whatever section I was working in and try to chat with me while standing way too close. He would cross all the way from the other side of the quad to talk to me when I was walking between classes. He gave me such an icky feeling. He did not get fired for this. He once brought in a German movie for us to watch and hear the language spoken. It was a rated R movie and had tons of nudity in it. He did not get fired for this. This was in the 80s, and the TV show America's Most Wanted was very popular. One night, the episode had a guy who looked exactly like this teacher. The criminal was wanted for kidnapping and causing the fatal outcome of a teenage girl. The next day in school, several students were talking about it. One student, a smart aleck, asked the teacher if it was him. The teacher became enraged, kicked the kid, and stormed out of the classroom. Nobody ever saw him again. I'm assuming he got fired, but no one ever confirmed or denied anything. It did look exactly like him. Story 35. I wonder if anyone will guess the name of this one. High school choral director got away with inappropriate conduct with children for decades because the school district covered it up every time. One of the revolving doors of assistant choral directors straight up tried to get his rear fired for it and quit in protest when she was unsuccessful. Goated teacher, by the way. I still remember him having to be gone for like 2 weeks during my freshman year because he did the same to a girl in my class. The poor girl ended up leaving the school and didn't really understand the extent of the trauma, both with what had happened, but also him getting away with it, and the ostracism she felt as a result. She had endured, but I could see the brokenness she had in her eyes while trying to stay strong and composed. Apparently, the school even gave him the biggest get-out-of-jail-free card imaginable by asking him to retire, and he'd get to keep his full pension after the penultimate inappropriate interaction with a girl. Nope. Finally had a full-on affair with a student, and the local cops caught him on a phone call with her detailing their encounter. This man lost his pension, his marriage, probably got disowned by all 7 of his sons, and is serving up to 20 years in prison. Rot, you piece of crap. For all of the Christian virtue signaling and proselytizing you did to us, you were the unholiest of them all. Story 36. Got intoxicated, I'm not sure on what, one weekend, came into his classroom and smashed up the place. He was never seen at the school again. I had assumed he was prosecuted, but I don't know details. He was the wood and metal shop teacher. Since this predates the era of computers throughout the schools, that was one of the rooms with the most expensive equipment. And my mom was fired from a teaching position at my school. Okay, not really. She had been hired as basically a year-long substitute for a teacher who was having a difficult pregnancy. Over the summer, that teacher decided not to come back. Mom was the obvious choice to be the permanent replacement, but our principal thought he had been hired at another school and offered the position to someone else. And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.